we are 5 after, so let's get started. Uh, Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SMP community meeting. Uh, Today is 22nd July, and we are just about to get started. We have a couple of people joining in. So while we do that, we have some topics for today's discussion, and if you have any other topics, feel free to add them to the meeting minutes. The link to the minutes is in the chat, and also jot down your names in the attendees list as well. Okay, this is the first SMP community meeting after SMP has been adopted into the CNCF. Uh, so the onboarding process is going on, and we have a lot to come. Uh, with that, let's move on to the first topic for today. Will be Lee will be giving a project charter review. Lee, would you like to get started?
Yeah, sure. Good. Hey, I tell you what, it's really nice to see all of you. There's 11 or so of us on the call, which means, well, yeah, I guess it is the majority of us are, new to this project, and you're in luck. This is like the best call to be on for this project. The intention of what we're going to hopefully work through today is a couple of things. What the heck is service mesh performance as a project? I think that from my perspective, in the best of ways, that is it's not an undefined question. It's defined, but with the other maintainers willing, it's something of an open question, or an intentionally open question, that would probably evolve over time. We'll see. But for the majority of us, there's many of you who are coming from the layer 5 communities, from the projects within that community. That's phenomenal. Some of you from that community are maintainers on SMP. Some of you have heard of SMP and haven't. And so we'll try to go through. So we should just really quickly talk about what SMP is. I'm sorry, SMP. Oh my gosh. We're like 10 minutes into the call and I said SMP. Oh, that's horrible. We're doomed. It's been jinxed. Oh, I don't know if it's recoverable at this point. Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what, I don't know if it's awkward that Otto and I are both laughing, or that just shows our age, or what, but okay, good. So for a quick brief recap, let's share some slides, talk about what SMP is, talk about what we think the roadmap is. There's a charter, there's an implicit charter statement, but it's one of those things that, depending upon, that we want to try to harden, maybe expand, maybe not, maybe contract. That's the thick of what we wanted to cover today. There are a number of administrative items, or a number of items around the project, the project and how it engages in the CNCF. And so with this as the first call, kind of post CNCF, Nivendu Potocat in particular has spent time trying to help just organize around the project. So fresh meeting minutes, hopefully a fresh place in the CNCF's Bevy instance on its community, community.cncf.io. Hopefully we're establishing consistently reoccurring meetings. These videos are recorded and published on YouTube. Anybody is welcome to come to the call. Anyone is welcome to speak up and say things and suggest things. This project adheres to the CNCF Code of Conduct. And so For the vast majority of you on the call, it'll run really similarly to the rest of the calls that we have. And so as we walk through these things, I encourage each of you to think about areas of potential interest for you and places where you might impact the project. You'll probably hear me say this like more or less a half joke, probably too many times. And that is that the project SMP, Service Mesh Performance, is, if you were to say it as concisely as possible, you'd say that it's a specification. And specifications have all of the propensity to be boring, especially if they're really meaningful specifications. Oh, they just go on, and people bickering over whether or not something's an enum or a string or whatever, like just ad nauseum. For better or worse, this particular specification isn't to that point yet. Part of what we want to discuss is how to expand the spec. It's an incomplete spec. The project needs different other projects, different other products implementing it. And so, so interrupt as we go. This isn't about me speaking to everyone. I'm only going through this because there's a large portion of us that are unfamiliar with the project. And so implicitly, many of you are familiar with the project from the perspective of having used or contributed to Meshery. So Meshery implements is the sort of the canonical implementation of this specification. We're hopeful that other projects, other products will implement. The spec right now is captured in the form of a set of protobufs, a set of protos, and it's incomplete. It needs a bit of refinement in terms of that, making sure that it's abstract and not specific to any one mesh. That's actually that statement right there. And I'm going to call out Utkarsh and Otto as two of the maintainers of SMP. I'll say that statement that service mesh performance is service mesh agnostic. It's implied in the name, but I don't know that it's implied. It's just not explicitly stated that it is intended to be universal and agnostic of any given mesh. There's a couple of slides that that we can share that talk about the scope of the project. And that's probably the next place to go is what's lined up for roadmap. There's about 4 areas that have been kind of outlined for roadmap. And really, again, like this is for Otto and Utkarsh and all of the rest of you to weigh in on what that roadmap is and potentially change it. I'm going to share for the moment, not because Navendi is sharing the wrong thing. That's very much the right thing. I'm going to share it because this way, all of you can jump in and type in your thoughts as we go. So Slack chat. You know what? Let me just put it into the one way. So this deck here is what we can, I think, look at, and it's the same text as what you find in the roadmap.md, but this way we can expand on it a little bit. You know what, let's not cover this slide, but let's just go there's a few areas. There's kind of the specification, there's publishing things. Since this is a spec project, a lot of times spec projects go hand in hand with an implementation. Right now, Meshery is that implementation. This isn't dissimilar from what you find in other CNCF projects. If you're familiar with Open Application Model, OM, and KubeVela, OM is a spec, KubeVela is the implementation. Spiffy and Spire, Notary and Tough, or Tough and Notary, Open Telemetry and Open Census, or Open Telemetry, Open Census. That's a bastardization. I'm sorry, but point is, it's not uncommon for there to be specs and implementation sort of hand in hand. Now, some of you may or may not be familiar with the notion that an article was published on the project yesterday. And so we should include a link. And congrats, you're already internet famous. And that's the first of what I hope is really an ongoing set of publications. Publications written by others, sure, but publications written by each of you or all of us. So I'll put this, sorry, I'll put this up in the announcements. So, one thing that I can't help but point out, and this is in part because it's kind of top of mind, for some of us, we are still asking ourselves, I know I am, and I expect others that have been around the project for a while still are. And that is, what's the difference between service mesh interface and service mesh performance? I'm not going to go, we don't need to sit there and explain it, but is to say that part of that's a good question to reflect on as we think about the charter. Like one of the other maintainers on two of the SMP maintainers, and by the way, just there's a list of maintainers now, and I think I speak for the rest of them when I say that at some point it would be lovely to have, at some point, meaning as soon as possible, it would be lovely to have other names down as maintainers, people who've been around and are contributing. Some of you have already contributed to SMP, so that's, and for my part, I'll say, I'd love to not be speaking on this call. I'd love for Otto and Specific to be doing lots of interesting things here and speaking so much and talking about all of that he has to be asked to be quiet because we're into the thick of it. One of and by the way, just since we're all new here a bit and we're kind of getting familiar, I should take a moment to say, I've been saying Otto and I've been saying Utkarsh as two of the maintainers. Otto, do you mind saying hi and letting some of these folks get to know you?
Oh, sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Otto van der Schaaf. It's quite difficult to pronounce. Well, I've been working for a long time on Nighthawk, which is a load generator and load characterization tool that is able to measure latency for specific workloads. And yeah, that's something that's been going on for about 1.5 years now. And well, what I'd love for this this project to be is to be able to, if we can get this spec defined in a way that, well, Nighthawk could be one of the load generators under the hood. And also like flesh out different ways to measure test subjects like a closed loop, open loop, and maybe even more fancy things. So yeah, that's
very good. And to the extent that it matters, Otto is, well, recently shifted roles into a role with Red Hat. And Otto, I'm going to bastardize this, but like, more or less doing more of the same, maintaining Nighthawk, being involved around Envoy, being involved in performance-centric things, being a maintainer of SMP, and any other things.
That's right. That's right. So I shifted roles. I was engaged. I'm now engaged at Red Hat. Well, over there I'm working as a principal Envoy engineer with a focus on performance. So I'm, doing a bit of both. And well, yeah, before that I was doing it from my own company, and that was had different kinds of focuses, but I think I'm now in a good spot because I'm now more focused on the performance work. So yeah.
So, well, Otto, I was just trying to pull up your company. Okay, good. I was just going to take a quick inventory of other folks on the call. So good. So the majority of everyone else has had a chance to talk to everyone else on this call. Shubham, I know you're somewhat fresh on some of the projects, but fear not, we'll get you engaged. So to Otto's point, part of the goal of today's call is to, well, get you have the rubber meet the road. There's a few things that I wanted to try to outline some objectives so that we can stop listening to Lee on the calls and start listening to other people who are talking about the work that's going on. I think that the work, so by the way, Nick Jackson, another SMP maintainer, he's at HashiCorp currently. He's co-authoring a book with me at the moment on service mesh patterns, which we'll talk about. It already does. I think it's an early release now. Already talks a little bit about SMP, but I'm hopeful that we will have published a few things before the book is done, so we can write more. And the book itself might be a little bit of something that we discuss. One, just for everyone to take pride in the work being, published in that venue. But two, there are a couple of you on the call that I would love to have your names in the book because you've reviewed or written portions of it, bits and pieces. Some of you are the best representatives of what SMP, what performance in this regard is, and things to think about over it. So, okay, where to start on the topic of publication? So what I did was we just took these 4 areas and split them into 4 individual slides, so that hopefully we could spend some time typing some of what we think the objectives of these areas are, or changing what this says if we don't think that this is right. So guess what? This meeting is recorded, and some of the things that I'm going to say candidly are going to be out there, and that's fine. One of the things that I didn't actually get a moment to read this article, but one thing I wanted to say is, I think highlighted in here, the first paragraph that I'd read, and first I'll say, like, that green is atrocious. I have no idea where he got this. It's just the green in the background is horrific. It's a violation of the logo. The logos, by the way, are now property, or are now in the CNCF. So the artwork for the logos, and we'll have more rigmarole around what we can do in the CNCF. There are opportunities open to each of you about giving as a project. We like next meeting, Devendu, if we can, it would be wonderful to have a walkthrough of what resources are open to the project now that it's part of the CNCF, and what's our plan to empower those that are here with the ability to go use those resources, go host a webinar, go talk at KubeCon. SMP, Service Mesh Performance, is now listed on that CFP explicitly. And so there's a lot that goes on there. The only reason I'm bringing this article back up is to say that there was one here. Hey, one of our slides that's in our deck is right up here. So guess what? This is about the ugliest slide that we've ever made, and it was done intentionally ugly. And it's too bad that was the one that was published. But this does answer the question about what the alignment is with SMP and SMI. I wanted to bring this up because there was a statement here about the fact that bringing potentially those two projects, or these 2 or 3 projects together, SMP, SMI, and Meshery, speaking on behalf of the CNCF, it is an alluring thought. the two projects, SMI and SMP, are most closely aligned. And this is what I was going to say, is that one of the other maintainers, Nick Jackson, is an SMI maintainer, as well as I'm an SMI maintainer. And it's been evident to me through the process of trying to align these two specs that SMP already, well, geez, just look at the number of people that are on the call already. This is twice as many or 3 times as many that show up to the SMI call. Like, SMI needs some help. We're trying to breathe some life into it. It might get some life breathed into it through SMP. In terms of some of the objectives, like in terms of like publication, there is the IEEE has a magazine called, or I think it's a magazine, a publication called The Bridge. And they've been asking for an article. And I think that, so I think that it's a cross between an academic publication slash just a long article. And so I'm talking about this right now because it is one of the objectives. I never wanted to write it myself. When we signed up, I was always thinking of Otto specifically, and a couple of people from, and a couple of others. So hopefully we'll end up, Otto, if we do this, it actually needs, I didn't realize the deadline for the draft was like 2 days ago. It's not a deadline. It's like they're anxious, antsy, and want to see what a draft looks like. And from what I've seen of these other main articles, they are thorough. Like, here we go. Here's an example. So there's an abstract and introduction. Yes, it's thorough. Yeah, I guess it's more or less an academic paper is what this boils down to. References and like this kind of a thing, I think is something that we would ideally be doing 6 months from now, after we've done some further study and have more research under SMP's name. But we're also going to find that SMP, I think, is a leaky project, if you will. The concept of it is leaky. What I mean to say is that we already talked about Nighthawk for just a teensy bit. I think that we want to talk about much more about Nighthawk specifically, and some of its advanced capabilities, some of its tried and true sort of oldest capabilities, if you will, just in terms of performance characterization, but there's some advanced ones as well. So it's SMP is leaky in that hopefully we'll end up bringing together a few projects, like intentionally. The CNCF is wondering, should these projects come together because they are interrelated? And that's very much so the point. So, okay. It's like, I don't know how many times I'm going to digress in this meeting. I think that's about the 9th, but the Otto, this is something that to follow up with you very quickly on, to see if more or less there's just existing, more or less if a lot of the things from your last Service Mesh Con talk or other materials are,
yeah. So yeah, Nighthawk is able to like support some research with this, and I think Mritika also was interested in collaborating on this, right? So well, I try to pick this up shortly and see what she's been up to as well, because well, as you may or may not know, but I've had some personal issues or personal family matters going on in the past couple of weeks. So I've dropped the ball for a bit on this, but I'll take a look ASAP.
Okay, yeah, great. There's another gentleman to introduce, and we'll see if we can't get him onto the call. His name's Pablo. He's a former employee of mine. He's I forget his PhD is in either physics, mathematics, or data science or something, but he's focused on data science. And so he and I had him working on this very thing, except it was described a little bit differently. It was, are there algorithms that can be designed that will optimize your network topology? More like you have any number of nodes in a network, they are speaking to one another and interacting, they're interacting to various degrees with higher frequencies, lower frequencies, higher volumes, lower volumes. After analysis, what's the optimal network topology for that environment? And taking into account that some of what was being analyzed were physical network layouts, physical switches and routers and things, VMs and containers as well. I think it's easier to take action on the output of those algorithms when your workloads are ephemeral, because then you can actually manipulate, like push them around and write some affinity around them or bring them closer or whatever you need to do. The physical, but anyway, the algorithm would take that into account whether or not something was movable or not. Anyway, point is, we need to get Pablo on this call. I'm quite a nice guy, a smart guy. He wanted to help in publishing this as well. And so we need to get an introduction going there.
Yeah, I think that would be nice. That sounds like.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, yeah, I don't know what some of the Latin characters or the Greek characters that were used in some of his algorithms are called. It was interesting work. Anyway, well, another thing that ideally we would be publishing, and this actually for the majority of you that are on the call is still kind of bored out of your mind, wondering what's the project about. This actually is an area here. So one of the resources that's open to Service Mesh to this project is the CNCF has labs. It has rack time, if you will, on some physical hardware from Packet, from a hardware, from a second tier sort of cloud service provider, if you will, called Packet. And as such, with tooling like Nighthawk and like Meshery, this project can first define, I was going to show the info about the labs, but I guess it doesn't matter. This project can first define what's a valid benchmark, like what's an interesting workload, what's a valid thing to test and study and examine, there might be just results of random tests to go talk about, look at, learn from, publish, and do so on an ongoing basis. And that means that, well, how are these tests being run? Well, two of you, actually, Rudraksh, who's on the call, just got done demonstrating the ability to pipeline Meshery in a GitHub action and have it perform conformance tests. Something that we should put, I believe that we should put onto the roadmap here is in context of publishing ongoing benchmarks or establishing benchmarks and publishing ongoing results, is the ability to automate that type of publishing or to the extent that we can. And so there's an open issue, I believe, in the SMP repo that calls for a GitHub action that would invoke Meshery and Nighthawk to run a performance analysis. Rudraksh, let me put you on the spot and ask if you recall this, an issue being open about this.
Yep, I do.
Okay. Could you do me a favor? Find that issue and make note of it. Well, I suppose in the publications section here. And so automation. one thing, and so Otto, I don't know if this falls under research or publication, but the notion that we would define interesting benchmarks.
Yeah, well, I think that research probably leads up to towards figuring out which benchmarks are interesting. So that's but yeah.
Okay, so that's an item for research. So there's something about SMP that that even though it's called service mesh performance, I think that there's a lot of things to examine outside the context of a mesh. For the foreseeable future, much of what we're focused on here would be service mesh specific, or rather in context of a mesh. Part of that is actually showing what the difference is in terms of these performance measurements when workloads are on a mesh or not on a mesh. That's an interesting thing to characterize. So to make some of what we're doing tangible, the thing that I just said just there is like, is something for any one of us to pick up, grab a sample workload, run through it, like for any one of us to go define, like, what is an interesting test? And if it's wrong, and we go run a bunch of tests and even publish those things by wrong, like, I mean, if it's uninteresting, it's still good work. Like, I think it's hard to do an uninteresting test. There are certain types of tests that will illuminate and provide more insight than others, but nearly all of the above is valid, so to speak. Okay, there's this area about specification. So I wonder if we might even be able to get into like action items on something like this, because there's a set of protos in the repo that are here. So let me put the link to it. These are underformed. There are 3 of them. The largest one is Service Mesh Performance Proto. There are, I think, a few aspects of this that are either too technology specific, or they are not abstract enough. So we would want to make sure that things like the fact that you would capture the performance of an ingress gateway for a service mesh is maybe, or an egress gateway's performance, that those are optional as part of the spec. Not every service mesh will have an egress gateway. Some will, some won't. Some service meshes do not have their own ingress. And so, like, here's a good question is, does that mean that an ingress gateway is optional and that is a valid SMP compatible results report if there's no details captured here? It's like there's many of these types of questions to go through. Like, hey, should we, as we look at this spec and we look to, part of the goals is to get all of the service meshes involved, have them self-reporting their performance, have that going into a central dashboard, ideally. Again, I'll use Meshry as an example because some of you, again, just presented this yesterday. Meshry runs conformance tests, and each of the service meshes are being encouraged to self-report their conformance against SMI. In a similar fashion, each service mesh can be encouraged to self-report its performance ongoing and sort of watch the performance trend at release after release. And it's the thing on something like this is, I don't know that a similar table for SMP, like, it would make sense to me that we might characterize that part of what can be analyzed is how different load generators are performing their analysis. I think that that's a really interesting thing. There's been work and analysis done by Otto and others in the past. I think that that makes for a great blog article, and as interesting as people go to understand a set of charts or a set of analyses, they need to understand it in context of that load generator, that performance analyzer. I think that listing Envoy like explicitly on an SMP chart can make a ton of sense, because Envoy is like an essential and core component to 5 or 6 or 7, or how, depends on how you want to count, 7 or 8 different service mesh data planes. And so as such, since it's, essentially ubiquitous, highlighting it explicitly might make sense. Having tests that look at just data plane things, or just control plane things, or holistic things. I think these are all valid types of performance tests. I said that SMP, so we should, Navendu or Utkarsh or anyone, can you all help write some of that down? It's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed at how many times I've said that very same thing and it's still not written down anywhere. So that's probably like about defining different benchmarks and what would be interesting. There's a doc in the SMP community drive right now that's called the Layer 5 community drive, because SMP's young, but there's a folder in here for Service Mesh Performance Project. Navendu or someone, we would do well to capture this in the meeting minutes, like a permanent link to, that's actually where the meeting minutes reside. I think we've had prior, this is really pretty funny actually, we've had prior meetings that were basically this meeting, SMP, and Otto's been on them before, as you can see. And we ended up talking about like Nighthawk was kind of the focus. And that's actually why I bring this up, is to say that I was just talking with, well, I think Otto, I think he's an Envoy maintainer. D, whose last name I don't remember. He's out of the Philippines, I think, or out of Singapore. I'll find him. But point is, there's a number of people who are focused on C++ and have been described part of what we've talked about in the past. And I guess I consider that part of that adaptive, part of what we've talked about in the past about adaptive load control and having custom adaptive load controllers is, in my mind, in scope of SMP, or like is something to be discussed in this context. Like that's extraordinarily interesting to the project.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think that through that technology you can answer some of the high value questions. So earlier you mentioned like which benchmarks are interesting, and I do think that this one might answer questions that are directly related to costs of the end user, and that's always interesting.
Totally. There's that kind of, along those same lines, that brings up some of our other discussions as well around page speed and how that's very relevant to these discussions. I just said something, it was something we should capture about Nighthawk and adaptive load controllers, and I don't know where that type of work gets listed here. Maybe it's under research.
Yeah, I think that will do. It's good to know that this component is like independent of Nighthawk's load generator, so you could, with a little bit of effort, also plug in other load generators that do not support this. So that might be useful to list it separately.
Oh yeah. Wait, let me make sure that I characterize that correctly. So is it the case? is it that you're saying Nighthawk has a plugin model for if you've written a custom adaptive load controller, you can plug in that custom controller? Or are you saying that whole framework in Nighthawk is actually detachable? And
the adaptive load control system is like sort of standalone. So you should kind of reverse this, because the Nighthawk, while they live in the same project, Nighthawk is integrated as a plugin, like a reference one.
That's okay. That's awesome. Yes. Okay. Look, I do this. I have, for my part, I think I have such an appetite to go and do a lot of these things that we kind of talk about a lot of them, and that's good, and that helps us form a charter. But then, like, getting down to brass tacks, if you will, on, okay, well, what do we want to do by the next time that we meet? Like, first of all, when is the next time we meet? I think it's in 2 weeks. It's every second and fourth Thursday, I think. Who else, who has, for my part, I'll say, like, this is something that I will attempt to drive focus around and attempt to assist in getting over the hump. I've got, because it's basically, I've got escalation emails for that draft. And so other than that, who else wants to chime in on things that they think they might have explored, or they might have asked questions about before we meet next, or things they might want to demo or look at next time we meet?
So for me, I'll try I said this last meeting, but this time I'm really going to do it. I'm going to try and propose some changes to these protos. And I think that might yield some things to discuss next time. So
that's fantastic. That really will. Okay. Wait.
I think I'd come up with a action for performance testing.
Cool. Beautiful. Rude Rocks, your audio didn't come through, but I know that you said you would love to demo a GitHub action for SMP performance tests.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. If, yeah, again, Utkarsh or Navendu or anyone else, you guys can help take notes if you would. Otherwise, I'll forget them. So something that I'll do as well is, and by the way, I hope that everybody gets this sense, and that that this is a young project and you're most encouraged to engage. For some of you who are looking to add significant line items on your resume, I would say that if you can stomach the boredom of working on a spec, what an impressively awesome thing that is to have on your, that ability. It takes an architect level type ability. It takes the title that Otto had mentioned before, the principal software engineer, principal architect. I can't remember but it takes that level of thinking and understanding to really be able to impact this type of a spec. And so for a lot of you, what an amazing opportunity that is. So for my part, I will send out, I'll try to fill in, and please, if anyone else has ideas, I'll try to fill in the rest of what I consider that these objectives are. So expanding on the specification, good. That's like, so part of this is, hey, we need to have an earnest discussion. Someone needs to present, and we need to have more of an earnest discussion. We have recently, but it wasn't excellent, is an understanding what SMI performance, SMI metrics are, traffic metrics. And there's been a suggestion by Nick Jackson a few times that SMP just take those on, just absorb them. in advance of actually doing that, like, how is it that S&P is relating to those, to the SMI traffic metrics? That's a topic, that's an objective. I'll try to fill in what I think a lot of these are, send out for asynchronous discussion. I will also try to beautify this, because I think that it's really important to get a blog post out about this. And it would be nice if, there were other names on that blog post sharing that byline. I'll also be bringing some people who are focused on C++. And I think that we would do well to have as an item on our next meeting, potentially an exploration of, for Otto to re-explain again, the adaptive load controller as a capability.
Sure.
So, and then for us to harden what we think we might, some of the things that Otto would like to see done with that. And okay, something else I'll call out, and this is, and by the way, this doesn't, I really desire for this not to be me. I desire for this not to be me that's presenting much of the work that's being done here. So I think that there's actually a Service Mesh Con CFP going on and about to end soon, that I would encourage any of you to go take a look at, go submit. There is, this next week, there's a CNCF Service Mesh end user group that meets. These are engineers from CNCF member companies that identify themselves as technology consumers, as users, not as technology producers. Like these are not maintainers of the project. These are prominent consumers. They meet twice every week, and I'm sorry, not twice. They meet every 2 weeks. And last time they met, they voted. I think they, where is it? They voted in Meshry, yeah, and I was on the call, so I was the default. There'll be a presentation of Meshry, which means a presentation of SMP on this call. This call, I'll put the link to this. It's on the second Tuesday. Oh, they meet monthly, so okay. Second Tuesday of each month at this time. I'll put this into the notes. Would love to have any of you there, even if you're interested in helping describe SMP or Meshry on that call. Let's talk and let's have you do it. As a matter of, again, like helping us be productive and get some things done, there are a few mailing lists that the project has now that I think we're going to find the asynchronous communication through mailing lists is probably more advantageous for how this particular SMP runs, because time zones are, yeah, because that's just how I think that this project is probably going to be driven forth. It's a little bit easier for everyone to do that independently. A lot of what this project calls for is a bit deeper thought, sort of less hand-holding, less discussion, more deep thought and review and reflection. I would encourage all of us to, as part of the goals that we're establishing, there's a guaranteed 1 or 2 or multiple talks that this project can give at KubeCon. What do we want? We should take advantage of that. What do we want to talk about? What do we want to tell people? Are there things that we would have, part of that research that we would have done by then that we would like to espouse and convey? I would encourage us then to, keep that conference in mind and write down some goals around it. So I know Utkarsh or Navendu is going to, at some point, help take some notes on some of the things that are being said. What do we want to do. Navendu, do you want to wrap it up and take this last topic? Tell us about some of the mailing lists, what those are, who's on them, some of the things that we can do within the CNCF. Maybe that's also a good topic for next time as well.
Yeah, so we have a couple of mailing lists for SMP. Let me try to show this mailing list. So, okay. So these are basically these three mailing lists are basically the SMP mailing list. So we have a community mailing list and a maintenance mailing list and a user group mailing list. So we haven't used these mailing lists much in the past, but that needs to be changed. And oh yeah, so I think the mailing lists are self-explanatory. And about the CNCF, adding a community platform in a community group in the CNCF community is that. So we are going to submit a proposal to add the SMP project in to create a community group for the SMP project. So one of the so there is an open position for a co-organizer in this community group. So if that interests you, then please reach out. And there are so being part of CNCF will give some benefits to SMP as a CNCF sandbox project. So I think I will brief on that on the next meeting, yeah, to let everyone know that what we can do and empower each of us to go and do that. Yeah. Anything else to add, Lee?
Yep. There. One of the things that we can do ongoing as well is begin to have agenda items on this call in context of GitHub issues. I think there's 12 open issues at the moment, but there are more to be opened up, particularly as we define objectives in the roadmap. So one of those, there's a project site that is in need of having the mailing list published. Like there's the ones that Navendu was just talking about, but I don't know that those are published and that people know that they can either sign up or message on those. By the way, I mean, just like that, it's worth noting that the slides that we were just editing are also real-time published on this site. So that's something to pay attention to. Okay, good. Okay, there's good. We went over some things for next time. We talked about next time's discussion items. We should probably adjourn, follow up with an email that recaps what we discussed, what things that we're going to look to do next time. There are a number of you on the call who can immediately make an impact on the site. Please do take a look at the open issues. There's a number of you that are on the call that are aware that Meshery doesn't fulfill the full set of protos that are in SMP. It fulfills half of them or something. That's another area of discussion as well. So there's actually a lot going on in the project. I will follow up with the other two maintainers. So soon, and I'll also probably send out an email that just introduces everybody to the project and says, these are the maintainers. Here's a list of maintainers. Here's the mailing list. Here's the intro to the project. Here's a couple of blog posts that I think that we would like to write and to tell people about. Hey, we've got a Twitter handle, like to help introduce people to the rest of the project. Yeah. And yeah. Good. Anybody have any parting thoughts before we adjourn? We're right at the top of the hour. Who was on the last item? Intel was asking on about Ruud Raksh's action item. Yeah, on yesterday's SMI call, Intel, or I shouldn't say Intel, but I mean an architect from Intel was asking about, so Marlo Weston was asking about the ability to run performance tests as a pipelined thing. And we've made a promise to her, and she's representing a service mesh centric group at Intel of about 20 people. We've made a promise to her to get short video explainer videos over and to then ultimately demo this as well. So we should take a note. I don't know if Marlo is subscribed to this, to these mailing lists, the S&P mailing list. So that's another action item. But anyway, I figured I'd mention it because people are asking on about the work already. By the way, for what it's worth, a lot of the time when people come to look at S&P, one of the first questions that most users say is, "Oh, great! I need this info. Have you guys published the reports on the difference between the service meshes? Or does the project have? Hey, how should I run my mesh most efficiently?" On the first answer, the first question, it's like, well, no, well, we sort of, in some areas, we kind of have published some things, but broadly, we've held back from making a big stink about which one is faster or slower, because we didn't want to piss people off, in part also because it was hard. Meshery wasn't ready to help automate that testing. All of those things are no longer. Meshery automates this quite well, and always will need improvement, but for my part, I don't care about pissing anyone off. It's time to go piss off the projects and get them interested in what's going on and expose where they're fast, expose where they're slow. I don't mean to intentionally piss them off. I just mean to get them interested, is what I mean. But the fear of upsetting them is gone. The project is in the CNCF now and kind of bears that backing and has the open resources to it. So we should define some tests and go run them. And actually, I think to help answer the workload definition test, like what is an interesting benchmark? Well, those folks, I mean, Otto probably has, can talk about that for a few hours, but some of the folks at Intel that are interested as well, that is their field of focus, is just performance engineering. And so they've got lots to draw on for what is interesting to them. So, cool. Okay, yeah, I think that's it. I think we're, great first call. Nice to see everybody. If you're interested in doing something and you don't know what that is, then please say so in the Slack. So by the way, there are 2 Slack channels for this project. One is called Service Mesh Performance in the CNCF Slack. So Navendu, I think, had created that one a little bit ago. And there's also the Performance channel in the Layer 5 Slack. So, either one will work.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining. See you guys later.
All right.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.